CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara communities through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2022 to help keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400 and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you. Welcome to a holiday edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with my usual co-host, Jonah Bronstein of the New Bronstein Times, and joined, again, old friend, Matthew Fairburn. He covers the Sabres for The Athletic. And this is a 3-hoodie podcast. I don't know if it has to do with what's happening outside. Everyone is snowbound. We are recording this on Friday evening. And 3 dudes wearing hoodies, talking sports. What can be better than that?
We all have hoodies, but much to because I'm sure Paul Kaharski consistently tunes in, and he'll be pleased to see that none of us are wearing hats. He was very upset about the lack of professionalism last time. We still haven't gotten all the way to collared shirts, but at least we've ditched the hats and
logoed collared shirts that say Tim Graham and Friends on them. I'll have to work that into the budget next year. CTBK will have to help me with that. Help me find the right funds, not in terms of sponsorship, of upping the sponsorship, but as the accounting firm of Tim Graham and Friends. They're going to have to move some things out of our advertising budget. Maybe we'll look around and we'll have an advisory meeting with Gene Kirshner and see if we can fit this into the 2023 budget.
You're joking about this, but I think we should be launching TGAF merchandise and having some of our super fans can purchase these hoodies to help support this show.
Yeah. And do you think that would cover the cost of actually having these things printed up?
It would have to be like a manufacturer on demand situation. But yeah, we make sure that we don't
made to order
with
custom nameplates on the back.
Right. It could say Ravi on the back.
Yeah.
We do know a t-shirt printer. I don't know if he wants us to mention his name, but he is a Elmo's super customer.
Yeah, we're gonna have to pay him.
Huh?
We're gonna have to pay him because
we will have to pay them.
Like how it comes out.
He has a prank where he if he does something for you gratis, he has a prank that he pulls somewhere in the design. And let's just say that it's wise for you to just pay. And otherwise you're going to have to deal with a hidden joke somewhere within the design of your t-shirt. How's everybody doing? I guess, nobody really cares. They're maybe listening to this podcast right now. The Bills play tomorrow afternoon. Everybody's probably snowed in, mostly a high percentage of people listening to this podcast, and probably don't give a shit how we're doing. But I am snowed in for Christmas. I'm happy about it in that it's stress-free. I don't have to worry about being anywhere because I can't be anywhere. I will not be in Chicago for the Bills game. Matthew, the Sabres have canceled their game, so you don't have to worry about trudging downtown for that. Jonah, it's Hanukkah for you. You hate Christmas anyway. And you, it's always the war on Christmas with Jonah Bronstein, and I don't appreciate it.
Christmas is usually one of my favorite days of the year because, marathon of NBA basketball games on television. Used to go to the movies. I don't really do that anymore, but that's a big, Jewish tradition on Christmas, and Chinese food. This year I have to work, which is a little bit of a kink in the plans, but I'm still going to watch NBA games. I'm still going to eat Chinese food, and I'm going to be in the Christmas spirit.
Matthew, what's your weekend look like?
We're probably stuck. We had some tentative Christmas Eve plans, and we still have some tentative Christmas plans, but it's looking like the Christmas Eve plans have been wiped out, and Christmas is probably dicey. I can't really keep up exactly with. Nobody seems to know when this is going to stop. The accumulation doesn't look terrible, but the wind and other things. But Like you, I don't mind being snowed in for the holiday. It's stress free. You don't have to worry about getting anywhere and just spend it, at home. And it's nice. And we're doing this podcast, so we're all doing okay. It means we all have, for now, power and internet, and so life is good.
Say that adjective that you used when you were talking about your schedule. You said the word a couple of times, and it was quite definition.
That I have tentative plans. Is that
Yeah,
what it-
tentative.
Yeah, I thought he meant tentacles.
Tentative plans, which is the right way to say it. But I think that people say tentative, which you get rid of that T. And now I'm thinking to myself, that is exactly what I hate. I hear, especially when you're watching the weather a lot, like we have been the past few days, there are meteorologists who say temperatures, which drives me crazy. Or the affectation that seems to be gaining popularity. And the best example I can use, and there are others, but Tim Hortons, you hear like the people dropping of T's. You are adding the T and you're emphasizing it. And I like that. And it stood out to me as you're talking about your tentative plans when I say tentative, and I need to make a correction because I don't want to be a hypocrite.
It's kind of like the old Bills defensive tackle Kyle Williams.
Right.
You have to, it's not Williams. It's
Kyle Williams or the Tennessee Titans. There's all kinds of people say it a lot, and it's I don't
start rushing and you start dropping letters, and I think it's because I write more than I speak, so I just am used to seeing all the letters.
Now, when I was in college, in our campus radio station, WBWC taught us about W's as opposed to W. People say that, they skip it over. And I think it's a broadcasting thing to really hit every letter. So when you're saying tentative, it just struck me. And I thought, you know what? Good for Matthew. And shame on me. Because if I am going to sit back and say that meteorologist shouldn't say temperatures, then we should be able to say tentative. What about the word? What about the position behind home plate? Jonah, what is that?
Home plate. Oh, umpire?
The catcher?
What is the position behind home plate?
The catcher?
Catcher, you say, Matthew?
The catcher.
Catcher. I grew up as a catcher guy. I think catcher is the right way. But also, yeah, a catcher. There's an A in there, but you also have a catch. You play catch. You don't play catch. Stephon Diggs didn't make a catch.
Have a catch.
All right.
Mike Rodick, remember he used to say milk?
He also said women when he was talking about one woman. He had a bunch of them. He also had something of, hut dogs, not hot dogs, but hut dogs.
Have you ever heard him pronounce garage?
What is it?
It's more, I can't even accurately depict how Rodak would pronounce it. It was like garage. He couldn't spit it out properly.
Not like the Canadian garage.
Which is funny because one of the first words we've heard somewhat clearly from our son was garage. He'll run over to the door, and I'm like, he practically already pronounces it better than Rodak, and he's a year and a half old. So I've actually I got to text Rodak and let him know that.
Well, that's because his mother is a good woman.
That's right.
No matter how you pronounce it, it's a shitload of snow out there. There's been conversation. Jonah Bronstein is a believer of this, that the game on Sunday should not be played if you're in this snow band. Didn't you say the game should be moved, right?
Well, it's tomorrow, Saturday.
I didn't say that actually. But I generally of the opinion that I thought last week's game should have been moved to Sunday, even though the snow didn't attack us in the way we thought it would. But I don't think the television windows are more important than safety and travel and doing the right thing about playing the football game. This one's a little different with Christmas being the holiday, but next year they're going to start playing games on Christmas, and that's going to be an annual tradition. So I do think that it should have been considered if it was a better option to move this game to Sunday, that a lot of these games in this winter storm region should have been moved to Sunday.
I was pleasantly surprised by the NHL getting ahead of it and postponing the Sabres Lightning game. I thought that was
Matthew. I need to point out though that if the Sabres played in the dome,
That's
this
true.
game wouldn't
only.
need to be canceled or postponed or moved at all.
If the county would just pony up and build a dome over KeyBank Center, it would have been totally fine. But
Right.
It worked out very nicely.
It shows the difference, though. A lot of these NHL games, specifically this Sabres Lightning game, are not married to a national television window and a national television contract that requires that the game be played at a certain time or else, under any circumstances, whether they're deadly to the fans or not.
What they are more tied to, though, is the gate, as Tim has mentioned before when we talk about hockey and the money the sport brings in. Like, each individual gate is important, and the Sabres lost a Friday night, everybody home for the holidays against, a recent Stanley Cup winner.
With decent weather, there's a walk-up crowd for this game.
Yeah, there's a nice little, so they lose that, they flip it and get a Saturday afternoon game instead, which I think will probably have, hopefully, depending on if they're still in it, a similar draw for people. But so it's not, a terrible swap, but they do have that. I also don't know if the NHL would have been as proactive in postponing this game had it not bumped right up against the Christmas break and the mandated 3 days off that the players have, because the Lightning could have gotten to Buffalo, and conceivably, the Sabres and Lightning could have all gotten themselves to the rink today, but there's pretty much zero chance the Lightning would have gotten home tonight or, Saturday morning, in which case they would be running into the 3-day break and screwing everything up, and the NHLPA wouldn't like that. So I think that was one of the things that pushed them to be more proactive than maybe they would have been in another situation.
Let's stay on the Sabres. Jonah, you look.
Well, yeah, I want to say the Sabres. Well, I wanted to ask Matt if he thought, hockey-wise, if this postponement plays out well for the Sabres with extra time for Owen Power to get healthy. And
that's actually what I was going to ask. Not specific to Owen Power, but just how does this help them or hurt them? Because they're also pretty hot.
The Lightning out of the equation and going into maybe some easier games, or does the break hurt them?
I thought it was like perfect, exactly what you would want. If, now, do you want to be off for 8 days when you're on a 4-game winning streak in a vacuum? Probably not. But knowing that really what you had was one game in 7 or 8 days anyways, I don't think it hurts them even a little bit. I don't know, a lot of guys mentioned, the day before they broke, that everybody is starting from the same spot after the holiday break anyway. So really the only impact this is having is on this Friday night game against the Lightning. Maybe they could have carried something in, but Jonah mentioned Owen Power's out of the lineup. Henry Jokiharju's out of the lineup. Eric Comrie's working his way back from injury. Matthias Samuelsson and Rasmus Dahlin, along with Kyle Okposo and Zemgus Girgensons, had off days on Wednesday, their first day back at practice after that road trip, because they were so spent. Rasmus Dahlin was on the ice for the final 3 minutes of that Vegas game. Matthias Samuelsson was on the ice for the final 2.5 minutes of that game. It didn't feel like they were coming back from that trip carrying a bunch of momentum. What it felt like was that they absolutely emptied the tank on that road trip, and they had a nice spot already with 3 days off before playing the Lightning. So I thought the schedule set up fine, but to knock that game off of it, I think is even better. You get to enter the break on a good feeling, and yeah, you hope that, maybe, you're throwing that team off the schedule and you can jump back in against Columbus and have some easier footing there. But from a hockey standpoint, they're just beat up enough and probably just spent enough from that road trip that I think probably the only guy that's feeling like he wanted to be on the ice right away after that trip was UPL, the way he finished it. But I think the rest of them were probably grateful for some extra time to recover.
We talked about it after that West Coast road trip early in the season too, that Lindy Ruff message that he always liked to send after those long excursions would be that first home game back is an extension of your road trip because you're playing in a place that you have kind of lost touch with. There's a travel element to get you back to Buffalo. You're fighting off jet lag. You're getting reacquainted with your family or your dog or whatever, you're just, everything's still a bit of a scramble when you get home. And so this allows them to settle that much more coming back from that West Coast trip.
A lot of guys did have
Southwest trip. Sorry.
A lot of guys did have family in town, which is, kind of the unfortunate part. Some of these guys don't really get a lot of chances for their family to see them play. I know the Krebs family was in town, and Peyton's sister was supposed to sing the national anthem on Friday, which is kind of a bummer. Little things like that, I'm sure, bum the guys out where, you've got some family in town and, you're hoping to be able to play in front of them. But at the same time, these guys don't get a lot of time with their family, period. So, now they're kind of hunkered down and still get, that, and maybe aren't, maybe they get the extra juice from playing in front of their family, or maybe there's just like the rest of us, right? The day before Christmas Eve, you're scrambling to get a few things done before the holidays and your mind is a little bit elsewhere. So yeah, all in all, it just didn't feel like a very big deal hockey wise, fine to get it off the schedule and go into that holiday break feeling pretty good. They're sort of in the mix here now, coming out of the break, if they can keep things rolling.
What did we learn about the Sabres on their Southwest trip?
Well, I would say that they are starting to get adequate goaltending to probably call themselves, to have the belief that they can climb back into the playoff race. And how long that lasts, I think, is the big question. I was getting a lot of, maybe not a lot, I hesitate to extrapolate a handful of comments as the majority of our readership or anything like that, but I was getting occasional comments about being too kind on UPL early on when he had gotten called up, that I was, writing fluff pieces and I was being too soft on him, and he had nowhere, he didn't belong anywhere in the NHL. He's not an NHL goalie, and it's changing very fast. The feeling on UPL is like, keep him in, ride the hot hand. The swings of emotion in regards to this kid are part of why I was a little bit, easy on him when he came up, because they weren't planning on him to come up. It was a little bit of an adjustment for him, and he's still pretty young in terms of games played professionally. He had COVID interrupt his development. He had some other things, and he's starting to get hot. But now I find myself on the other side of it, a little bit hesitant to say, this is it. He's here. Ride the wave. You want to ride the hot goalie, but I think, Eric Comrie is getting real close to being back. And that West Coast trip early in the year, Eric Comrie looked like he was going to be, a really solid starter for this team. He cooled off a bit when, half the decor was out, but he still, I think, has a chance to be a pretty reliable, 1A, 1B situation with Craig Anderson. And yeah, UPL is playing well. So if they want to take their time with Comrie and let UPL ride this hot streak, that's fine. But even the semblance of decent goaltending for these guys, I think, is a huge deal, because the defense has been good when it's healthy, but it just seems like little injuries keep popping up. Like every time there's an injury with the Sabres, it's on the blue line. And the latest one is Owen Power. And you see how big of a deal he is when he's out of the lineup. He was, eating up a ton of minutes for a 20-year-old, for anybody really. And, to have him out, it's very noticeable. So, I think what was probably the encouraging sign from the road trip, in addition to the goaltending, was that they were winning games when they weren't necessarily playing their best. They were, if you looked at all the metrics in terms of expected goals and possession and shot attempts, they were on their heels and for stretches of those games, but finding ways to come out and win in tough environments in Colorado, in Vegas. Arizona is not really an easy out. I know, they're looked at as a pushover and they'll be, probably near the bottom of the standings, but it's a group of players that gave the Sabres a lot of trouble when they were in Buffalo, and they have been playing pretty hard. So I thought they were 3 quality wins, not necessarily the 3 best performances they've had all year, but the way that they're finding ways to win when they don't have their best game and finding ways to win when teams are trying to do different things to them, clog up the neutral zone, slow down their fast pace. They're starting to grow up a little bit as a group. And I just am fascinated by the idea of like what they can become in the second half of the season, because you don't hear a lot of people in the building. They're not slapping signs on the wall that say playoff caliber. They're not even really mentioning the playoffs. And maybe it's because hockey's a real marathon of a season and they're keeping tunnel vision. But at some point, that is going to start to creep into the vernacular surrounding this team. It's going to start to become part of the conversation, at least externally. And I'm curious to see how they handle that, because that's a good experience in and of itself, is to be in a game in late January or February that has, as Kyle Okposo put it yesterday, to go into a game where you really need those 2 points. And they didn't have a lot of those games. It's not even that they've been in a playoff drought. It's that they haven't even had a lot of those games in the second half of the season. You don't even really get those games in the first half, where you really feel like you need the points. So if they can get to that point, I feel like that's a win of a season. And if they can, somehow find their way into the playoffs, that's, even better.
Jonah, as much as you're out at the arena, how have you noticed any kind of fan apathy, either shifting to energy? I've been out there a handful of times in the last few weeks, and I've been surprised at the energy not being better. The Penguins game that I attended, there were a lot of Penguins fans in attendance for that game. And then they followed that game up a couple of nights later with, I can't remember who the opponent was, the LA Kings. And it just seemed kind of flat, despite the fact that Tage Thompson is, going to maybe be in the Hart conversation, believe it or not. Alex Tuck is on fire, and Dahlin is still emerging, although he's off his 100-point projection, but he's still a hell of a player and evolving before our eyes into a great two-way player. It just seems to me that the fans haven't come around yet. And is there a reason for that, or maybe I'm off on it?
I think you summed it up pretty well there, answering your own question. But yeah, that was the last home game, that game against the Kings. It was announced at 12,873. I thought it.
No, but I'm asking you because you're there more, and I think that maybe you'd be more attuned to the subtleties of feeling the energy. Mine is like, parachuting in and catching a couple of games that were not similar at all. West Coast opponent versus you can drive and come see Sidney Crosby from Southern Ontario and all this other stuff. So I'm just asking because you know it in a much more nuanced way than just those 2 games that I would have seen.
Right. Yeah, I am generally smarter than you on this topic, but you covered the last 2 games. And so I think that you have the correct summary of how that has played out recently. And I was mentioning, I think it was that last game against the Kings, I leaned over to Fairbairn. I said, this looks like the smallest crowd of the year. And I don't know if the numbers bear that out, but it felt like to me, the most sparse crowd and least energy in the building that I've seen in most every game. Maybe that game when the Bills were playing on TV was a similar atmosphere, which is why I don't know if I share the opinion that there would have been a strong walk-up crowd on a holiday weekend for this Lightning game. Maybe with people in from out of town, that this was a game people targeted early in the season as a good Sabres event for somebody that's only in town for the weekend. But I haven't seen much example. The big crowds there always seems to be a different reason, whether it's the opponent or a ticket promotion that might be going on. There hasn't seemed to be too many games where the Sabres were the hot ticket, that they had played very well the night before. They were coming off a road trip when they played really well, and it juiced the crowd a little bit. I haven't seen much evidence of that yet. I think that they're struggling with the fact that they didn't sell that many season tickets, and it might be very hard to sell this building out for the course of the season without a higher season ticket base, and that the Bills are still playing and still going strong, and there's other things going on at this time of year in other sports, high schools and colleges, and the weather that Maybe there's an uptick in interest in the second half of the season when the Sabres are the biggest game in town at some point in the calendar, but that's not the case now. And not seeing Tage Thompson can score, he literally can score 5 goals in a game, and I don't know if that sold 5 tickets. You would think it would. Maybe it sold his jerseys and sold autograph session tickets, but it doesn't seem to be that anything the Sabres are doing on the ice is exciting the fan base to the point where they're turning the turnstiles more than they were before. I think you're seeing a lot of energy in these games when they wear the red and black jerseys. They won all 3 of them. They've scored 6 goals in each of those games. There's a buzz in the building, at least so far in those nights, that there hasn't been the same with some of the other games, but you're not seeing big crowds. You're not seeing a lot of passion and energy from the fan base quite yet.
Yeah, I would say the biggest crowd, the best crowd was Thanksgiving Eve, I believe it was, which was also the first time they wore those red and black jerseys, if I'm
in the
remembering
Jack Eichel
correctly.
game, but that was a little bit different.
But I actually thought that the first time they wore the red and blacks was a better crowd than Jack Eichel. I think the numbers might have been better. I'd have to pull up the list. I think the numbers were better, and that just the overall energy in the crowd was just a much like healthier energy.
Right, the singing and yeah,
maybe
right.
that's like, my I just felt like the energy in the Jack Eichel game was like an over the top, like, venomous energy that people were coming out, rightfully so, coming out to express their hate for a single individual. And on that Wednesday night, it felt like people were out, expressing their support and love for the franchise, even if it was probably more so rooted in the nostalgia that those jerseys were bringing up. And that's where I think that maybe the holiday this weekend would have had a similar effect. They were going to wear the red and blacks, and you get, like with Thanksgiving Eve, you get, the people in from out of town that are like, yeah, let's hit a Sabres game. But to Jonah's point, there's really not been, it's almost like you have to be really in tune to the subtleties of the season to be getting excited. I think, even though Tage Thompson, it should be smack you in the face enough that, okay, that's a guy that I should just go buy a ticket and go see. But it's not as if the Sabres did what the Devils did and ripped off a real long winning streak and put themselves right at the top of the conference and announced that, hey, we're here. Because even coming off that first West Coast road trip of the year, they got their record up to about, I think it was 7-3 at one point. And like Jonah, I almost expected, it's my first season covering this team, so first time being in the building on a nightly basis, expected like, man, they've been hot. I bet there'll be, 5 extra thousand or, a couple extra thousand in here, at least an extra energy. And I think it is a lot more dependent right now, the where the franchise is at this moment. It's a lot more dependent on what night, what day of the week is it? Is there something interesting going on, like wearing a different jersey? Ryan Miller night, I'm sure, will be a big deal. RJ night was a big deal. Is Jack Eichel in town? Those types of things. The Bruins crowd was fantastic when there was a lot of Bruins fans, but I think that was a sellout. So they've had some good ones, but Jonah's right that it has not been, you wouldn't necessarily pinpoint, oh, that big crowd happened because, Tage was on his hot streak there. It's, it didn't get worse during the 8-game losing streak either. It's been fairly consistent, and I think it's worth monitoring because they were, at last check, The Athletic did a story a few weeks ago, and they were right near the bottom of the league in attendance. And when you don't have the season ticket base, the tickets aren't quite as cheap on the secondary market because the team's not going to, Joe Schmo in his house in Amherst doesn't want to go to the game and just throws the ticket on there for $7 or $8. When you're getting them from the box office, that's not necessarily happening. So some little things like that are probably impacting it, and people are slow to get back into their habits after COVID and coming over the border, whatever led to great crowds and 11 years without the playoffs, frankly. And the Bills are the show right now in town. They're not, it says something that on a night when the Bills are on TV, not playing in Buffalo, that's going to keep people away from the professional sporting event happening in town. But that's what you're dealing with when you have a Super Bowl favorite football team and a hockey team that hasn't made the playoffs in 11 years and is probably going to have to fight tooth and nail to try to break that this year because they're still so young. And so that's just what the Sabres are dealing with.
The Sabres also haven't had a home game yet against the Maple Leafs. That's always a big crowd and drives the ticket demand up a bit with how many Canadian fans will try to get to those games and games against the other Canadian teams.
Yeah, I think it's going to take to really get the building back. And, Tim was covering the team the last time probably that the building was, although I don't know in terms of attendance when it really started to dip, but I hear so many stories about what it was like when they were good and the way that building could get. And yeah, like a Leafs home game is going to draw a crowd, but it's going to be a pretty blue crowd, a pretty blue and white Maple Leaf crowd. And so I think it's really going to take like this team getting to the playoffs to bring people back, to make people say, okay, this is happening. Like this team is good again, because they just, it's not the fault of hardly anybody that's actually on the team right now that, that drought happened, but I think from ownership on down, there just was kind of a sour feeling about the team coming out of the pandemic. And I think they have taken time to win back some of that trust. I do feel like the roster is worth being excited about in a vacuum. If they had missed the playoffs for 3 years and had this roster, I think the crowds would be great. But 11 years is a long time in a sport like hockey where you're asking people to come to 41 home games, a lot of them in winter, a lot of them on weeknights, asking people to drive downtown, sometimes in not the best weather. Like, I understand it. So these guys seem to think they can win. It seems to be part of the challenge for the current Sabres group is like, I've heard Dylan Cousins mention it, or, a few other guys, like, we can't wait till we got, full crowds here again. Like, they want to earn that back. And I think they're, taking steps towards doing that.
I want to ask Tim a question, though, because I think last year crowds were very low, and a big factor was disdain for ownership. And there were those 2 occasions when the owners were on the ice and they got booed. The dynamics with that has changed, but how much do you think that's still playing a role in the lack of crowds at Sabres games?
Well, I don't hear it as much, and I guess probably because the team is better, but you'd hear it in the reasons from fans about why I'm not going to spend the money to go to the Sabres game. And you'd hear about the worn out seat cushions with the stuffing coming out of them and the broken cup holders and no toilet paper in the bathrooms and a place that hasn't looked like it's been painted or power washed in several years, and all the different things that go along with having a sparkling new arena. I haven't heard that as much, and maybe it's because the team is better and you can't people just who aren't looking for excuses not to go to the games anymore. If you weren't going to go, I don't know. I'm trying to talk my way through this because I don't know if I know the answer. I don't hear as much displeasure about the Pegulas. Of course, we are in football season where everybody loves Big Baller Bean and Sean McDermott, and the Bills have the top seed in the AFC heading into this weekend's games, and that's the overriding thing. We've gotten out of that lull of that losing streak where the Sabres hit the skids for a little bit. The team seems to be coming awake again. The idea of extensions for Don Granato and for Kevin Adams are actually digestible, or at least they should be for Sabres fans. There's showing some signs of life in the goaltending, like Matthew talked about. So really, when people talk about the Pegulas, it has to do with what the hell's going on with Kim. Where is she? Where is she in her recovery? What actually happened with Kim? So there's this mystery, but in terms of just having the disdain, I don't know. And in a strange way, maybe that's helping the Pegulas image, because the mere mention of Kim Pegula just got people pissed off because she was doing a podcast with Maddie Glab on the Bills, but she wasn't doing something similar with the Sabres. There was all this belief that there was more attention being given to their NFL team and their NHL team was being neglected because Kim was very high profile with things revolving around the football team, but not the hockey team. They didn't attend the hockey games like they attended the Bills games. And so I don't think that they necessarily neglected the Sabres, but in terms of where you would see them and a belief and a certain writer in town who likes to talk about how Kim Pegula doesn't know what she's doing and she's in love with her football team. And it's something that I don't know where he came up with that other than just anecdotally or where fans would see it, because Kim Pegula would be on the Bills sidelines before the game, but their box is empty for the Sabres game, but they live in Florida. There's all kinds of reasons for that. Should they live in Florida? That's a different conversation. A lot of owners do because of tax purposes. Robert Kraft lives in Palm Beach and not in Boston or Providence or anywhere near Foxborough. This happens. Ralph Wilson lived in Detroit. Anyways, we can go down the list. Should the Pegulas live here and pay taxes here and all that, and state taxes? In a perfect world, you would like to think so, but they don't. Much like most of their peers. So they can't go to all the Sabres games like you would expect them to. So there's been this built up animosity towards the fans. And I think namely Kim, some of it misogynistic. I think also you hear the waitress comments and all the different derogatory things said about her as an owner. What can she possibly know about sports, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's all baked into the casserole of anti-Pegulaism that has been around Western New York for a few years. But the fact that Kim hasn't been around and everybody knows she can't be around, even though they might not know the reason why specifically, I think has kind of deadened some of the vitriol and the hatred that people have for the Pegulas just for being the owners of the team. But does that stop them from buying tickets? I don't know. Is there a feeling of I'm not going to support this team because I don't want the Pegulas to have my money? Maybe that would even come from stadium pushback as opposed to Sabres not being good pushback.
I just have a hard time believing that about the psychology of Buffalo sports fans, that there would be enough of that. I'm not going to go.
We do see it. We do see it. You see it on social media.
You see it, but it's so convenient when Cody Eakin is out there and, the Sabres are skating to their 11th straight. It's the easiest thing in the world. It's like the people who, when the Bills and other NFL players were kneeling for the anthem and they're like, I'm not going to NFL games anymore. And it's like, how many of those people were there last Saturday night? Because the Bills are the Bills. They're the Super Bowl favorite and they're a big freaking deal. And they're playing in these awesome, fun games and the whole community's involved. And how many people do you hear now saying, well, those guys, were kneeling during the anthem. So I'm not going. I'm not going to support
NFL
that.
Ratings are up all over the place.
Where do you see any of that? And so that's sort of where I think what it is a combination of apathy for the on-ice product over the years with that as an easy excuse. You get to feel real. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't, you praised me for my pronunciation earlier. Now I can't, but you get to feel real proud of yourself when you're like, you have this real great, reason for not going. Well, I'm not going to support these owners because
virtuous.
You feel real virtuous when I'm not going to support these owners because they're not putting enough attention or money into this, or I'm not going to support these owners because they're taking too many tax dollars. Are those same people not buying Bills tickets because they seem to have a real easy time?
Right. No, I think it comes down to
else.
The fact that tickets are so readily available on the secondary market, which Matthew already touched on, that if the arena, there's probably a price point or an analytic, an algorithm that shows that you need to get to a certain percentage of capacity before the secondary ticket market doesn't hurt you anymore. So let's say the place is 75% sold on a nightly basis, or 80% or 83%. I don't even know what it might be. But when it's 50% and the other 50% of the tickets, or there's so many tickets available that people don't want to use, then you can just buy them on the secondary market. And for, as Matthew said, $7, you can get to a Sabres game as opposed to for, 65 or 80. And the Sabres aren't going to get that money. So I think it's just the availability of tickets, which was the case under Rigas ownership after Dominic Hasek left. It was, you really had to be a sucker or totally isolationist, a hermit, to not know somebody who could get you free Sabres tickets back in 2001, 2002, because all you had to do is know somebody who worked for Adelphia, or you needed a friend of a friend. They were giving away tickets left and right to the Sabres games. They were paper in that arena on a nightly basis. And even then they were getting 9,000, 12,000. It was ridiculous, but I think we're just back in that point now where tickets are so easy to get that you don't need to buy them from the Sabres anymore.
I think they should be paper in the arena more than they are now. There seems to be an active strategy to not do that. But if you could get more people in the building for a game when they score 6 goals in the third period, you might get more people that want to buy a what do you call it? The mini pack of tickets and come back for a few more games later in the year.
Yeah. I feel like if those games became more of kind of like the Vegas game became when they beat Jack, and it was like, man, if you were watching that on TV, you were like, man, I should have been there, or like the RJ game. But to have that be a Tuesday night, right? Like, and you look at the crowd, Tage Thompson scores a hat trick, and you look around and people are having a great time. I think there is a very much a, that type of narrative that can start to play into a fan's head where it becomes the place to be again. It's not the place to be. I mean, the sport is, is not what the NFL is in terms of demand and popularity, but it's also, you probably need to have the winning to get what you're talking about. Those crowds and they're taking advantage of some of these good crowds playing good games. They beat the Blues that night. When they wore the red and blacks for the first time, they are taking advantage of some of the decent crowds that they get, but they're just having trouble carrying that over. And it's not really the roster, it's not the team itself's fault. I don't know. There's as we've just gone through, a lot of different factors that make it really hard. It makes it amazing when you look at some of the sellout streaks in the NHL. The Bruins, I think, are up over 500 straight sellouts, which is just crazy when you think about it. But
A dozen years.
The Sabres had an incredible streak.
The Blackhawks recently came to an end. I think the Penguins came to an end last year, but some of these teams that go, 400 or 500 games with sellouts like that could be Buffalo, but you need to be, I think now they need to win that back. They need to win back that type of passion, because when you go 11 years, you make an apathetic generation in some ways, a generation that's waiting for the other shoe to drop because it has, all too often. And, that's going to be something interesting to follow too. This idea that if you're 21 right now, you were 10 in your prime hockey fandom years, 10 to 21.
Yeah. How many NBA fans did Western New York churn out over the last 15 years because the hockey was unwatchable?
Or worse yet, Blackhawks fans, because Patrick Kane was there and they were better and the Sabres were no good, or Leafs or whatever hot team, Tampa. I don't know, how many people jumped on different teams. I don't know. It's hard.
Or people that were always Bills fans, but now being a Bills fan is more of a 24/7 job. And there's some people that probably don't watch Sabres games because they're exhausted from driving around the city, putting Josh Allen cartoons on street signs all day long. You can only just have so much energy in your mind and your heart for rooting for sports, and people are like 100% saturated on the Bills right now.
Yeah, it's not a big enough city. Like the Bruins have that sellout streak, which is sometimes crazy to think about because the Bruins aren't always top of mind in Boston, right? The Celtics are really good. The Red Sox are insanely popular and have had a ton of success. The Patriots are, the Patriots. But when it's that big of a place, I think you know, and the team is good, right? The Bruins aren't lousy. They're not missing the playoffs for a decade. They would have a much harder time selling out that building than they used to when they weren't that type of team. But, you know, you don't get the residual benefits of like being able to have multiple teams capture a city's attention at the same time when the city's just not as big. And the Bills piece of it is huge because like the Bills fever is absolutely scorching the last couple of years, as it should be. I mean, people have waited a long time, just like the hockey fans are waiting and have been waiting for a long time. But this is the Bills moment, and people don't want to miss that. And the Sabres have to create something similar. They have to have something that people don't want to miss. That's how you get people in the building. That's why people were there for RJ. They didn't want to miss RJ's last night. That's why people were there for Jack, because they didn't want to miss the Sabres sticking it to Jack. You know, little things like that. Or you just have to be a really badass team like the Bills are, and you're going to have, you know, what the Bills get. That people still will have that energy for the Sabres. I don't think if this team makes the playoffs that people are going to say, yeah, gee, it's 70 and sunny and there's going to be a party in the plaza, but you know, the owners took too much tax money for that football team. So I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass on that good time down there and stick to my guns here. It's just not going to happen. If they're good, you know, all the little factors that we've talked about here are like when they're good, that's all it's going to take. Like, but good is not just winning a few games. Good is not being a few points out of the playoff race. Good is going to be like make the playoffs or be there in the final week where it's like this game gets them into the playoffs. People will show up, but it takes more than a few wins in the middle of football season when people have their attention elsewhere.
I'd like to talk to somebody, and I don't know who this would even be, that covered the Sabres in 91, 92, 93 when Pat LaFontaine and Alexander Mogilny were great players and they were a playoff team but didn't go further than the first round. And the Bills were a Super Bowl team. And was there space in the market and the fan base for both of the teams to draw well at the same time? Or was it this situation where, you know, Sabres season doesn't really start for the fans until the Bills season's over?
Yeah, that would be the legendary Jim Kelly, the late Jim Kelly, to tell us about that. Or Bucky Gleason, maybe he was in college at that point. He could probably view it as a fan who was likely reading the newspaper every day and consuming whatever media content was available at the time. But I want to talk about
you know, there's people around, but it would be harder to find, you know, the right guest to break that down.
Right. Let's talk about the Bills playing at 1:00 tomorrow at Soldier Field. If the Bills lose this game, is that a problem? And the reason I ask the question is because the weather can do this. Low scoring game. Justin Fields is a game breaker. David Montgomery is a pretty damn good running back himself. And the Bills have struggled at times to stop running backs. We have incredibly poor weather in the forecast, wind chills well below zero. This is the Windy City after all. And so wind gusts might not be the same as they are in Western New York, but the city is known for this. It is December 24th. This could be the weather as the great equalizer game. And it's one mistake from a Bills upset loss at a time when, granted, an NFC opponent isn't going to hurt as much, but you're looking at the Cincinnati Bengals closing from behind. You're looking at the Kansas City Chiefs with the easier schedule. The Bills will go and play the Cincinnati Bengals on January 2nd, by the way, on a Monday night game down in Cincinnati. What happens, do you think? Do you think it matters much if the Bills stumble and lose this game?
Well, I think it certainly matters in the standings if they don't get home field advantage. You know, they haven't won a road playoff game yet in this Sean McDermott era, and they haven't lost a home playoff game yet. So in that regard, yes, if they lose any of these final three games, and they probably don't get the number one seed, that would matter a lot in that regard.
Yeah, that's really the big thing, is that they have not that they can't win a road playoff game. It's just that the easiest path clearly is going to be for them to play at home. And I don't even really care about what the weather is like in their stadium. Playing at home is an advantage, I think, for these Bills. I think,
And the bye week.
and the bye
Number one
week,
seed, yeah.
having that number one seed there are advantages baked into it for a reason. Like, you were the best team in the conference. So that part does matter. They'll only be a lesser Super Bowl contender if they lose this game for that reason, because they won't be potentially squaring off. It's as much about playing the Chiefs not at Arrowhead as it is about playing them in Orchard Park. Like, playing them in a home playoff game at Arrowhead, in the place that's given them problems. It would just be nice for them to be able to flip that script a little bit and have it at home and, have that advantage for themselves. But in terms of, like, Tim is mentioning the path to victory here for the Bears, and it's the fluke path in some ways, right? Like, hoping that weather, makes things weird and can, get the Bills to stumble a little bit. And so does that diminish their standing as a juggernaut team in the AFC? Probably.
Well, I don't
not.
even mean from a reputation standpoint. I mean, there is, like Jonah say, in the standings, it could be a ding that costs you. This is an important game.
It probably
I think you can't
would.
look at this.
They have
could
a
cost
tougher
them
game
in
coming
terms
up.
of their seed.
So they could lose 2 in a row if they lose this one.
It probably, if they lost, it probably would cost them the number one seed, because you could beat the Bengals, but the Chiefs have a pretty manageable schedule and would likely be able to take care of business in that way. So that's why it matters. Every game matters from here on out until they lock up the number one seed. If the number one seed at any point is out of question, then none of it really matters. Anyways, it doesn't matter if you're 2 or 4 or 5 or whatever. They're going to be a top 4 seed because they're going to win the division. But
2 matters for the home game in the divisional round, and part of that is I think the fans deserve as many home playoff games as they can get, and deserve maybe that AFC Championship game at home. That'll be a big local sporting event, whether the Bills win or lose that game in the end.
And make no mistake, the Bills suck. They're 3-11. They've lost 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They've lost 10 of their last 11 games. They are not good.
The Bills?
They just got crushed by the Jets a couple of weeks ago.
Talking about the Bears? Who are you talking about?
Yeah, the Bears, yes.
The Bears.
Oh, you said the Bills.
I thought you were
said, let's make no mistake.
Hey,
you said, let's make no mistake. The Bills suck.
Oh, did I say that?
This is where if we had in the budget some nifty social media people, they would clip that. And
if we had Bobby still, that would be a clip that would play at the beginning.
Yeah, you're right. I'm
Make
sorry.
No mistake, the Bills suck.
The Bears suck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I want to do it again because I just messed up. Yeah, 10 of their last 11.
But they're a feisty
they got
team,
stomped by the Jets. But they hung tight against the Dolphins. They almost beat the Dolphins. They just played the Philadelphia Eagles last week and lost 25-20. The Eagles had to finish strong to win that game. It's possible, and in this weather and at home, this is like an anything goes type game. One play, it's the case in any game. It could come down to one play, but I think when the weather is like this, all it takes is one slipped defensive back and a missed tackle, and David Montgomery or Justin Fields are going for 80 yards and a touchdown.
Well, and I think there's this perception, somewhat rightly so, that the Bills got through the crucible with those 3 games in 12 days and 2 of them in Detroit and all on the road, and the practice schedule and the disruptions from the weather and the injuries. But really, they're still in that a little bit, even though they've had these 2 home wins the last 2 weeks, but they've still had a lot of weeks. And this is another one where it's a short week because of the holiday and they're not getting all their practices in. And they have a lot of players on the injury report and all these different outside of football factors. I think there's a mental and emotional thing that comes into play when you're playing on these holiday weekends. And the Bills have been very good at not letting that affect their season so far. But I could see a scenario where if they lose the game tomorrow, that those factors are a big reason why, that it was just too hard for them to keep the the winning streak going with all of these challenges coming at them week after week, and then it finally caught up with them, on a Christmas Eve game that, might be a game where they lose, and you look back at the end of the season and say, how did they lose that one? And those are some of the reasons why.
Well, so let's not talk about a Super Bowl parade yet. But Jonah, you attended a victory parade in the city of Buffalo recently. I know you want to touch on that. I think it's a pretty cool deal. Bennett High School winning a state championship with all of its turbulence throughout the season and some hardship and some controversy because of Section 6 forcing them to forfeit a bunch of games over a clerical error. But if you can for us, sum up what this means. Bennett High School in a league that has been much maligned over the decades, to come from the city of Buffalo and to produce a championship like this is a pretty big deal.
Well, it's a championship parade through the city of Buffalo, which doesn't happen too often, and it is a big deal. Maybe I don't know how deep into the woods we can get with this, but the history of city football that wasn't part of Section 6 and was its own thing with the Harvard Cup for many, many years, and then was allowed into Section 6, but was kind of discounted and didn't believe that many of these programs would be successful. And what Steve McDuffie's been able to do over the course of a decade in building up this program into being a Class AA state champion, the largest classification, and an inner city school with a predominantly black roster. McDuffie is the first black head coach in New York State to win a state championship in the state in history. Black superintendent, black mayor. Was a very much a black excellence type vibe at this parade yesterday, and the weather held off, and it was very much I think a proud moment for a lot of people in the city overall, but also a lot of people who have any connection to this Bennett program, which actually draws players from 6 different city high schools. And this is a team it's a program that's going to be contending for state champions unless they do something to screw it up, the momentum they have going for many years. There's these phase-in schools that haven't had seniors yet. There's going to be more talent coming into this Bennett program as the years go by. And they already have a team that had 11 players on the All-Western New York team, which might be a record. They have 2 Division I signees, 3 guys going to Division II schools from their 7-member senior class. They're probably going to have 7 guys, 6 or 7 of those seniors in college. And they have, you go in the junior and sophomore class, another 6, 7 eventual Division I, Division II type players. It reminds me a lot of what Niagara Falls basketball was 10, 15 years ago, where this is a public school. They're not drawing from the entire Western New York area, but it's a big city with a lot of talent. And, if they weren't on this team, if it isn't these 2 seniors, Rashard Perry and Jaden Lewis, there's NFL players in this city of Buffalo public school system. And 5, 10, 15 years from now, I think we're going to look back and say that there were multiple NFL players playing on some of these perennial state champion Bennett teams.
Now, I don't really get the dynamic because I never covered high school sports here in Western New York, but I know how recruiting works with the private schools. Do you think that what Bennett is doing here will prevent kids from automatically, and I'm talking about the best athletes, automatically going to Canisius High School, St. Joe's, St. Francis, and saying, you know what, I'm actually going to stay and play here at Bennett?
Well, I mean, that's come up in speeches and press conferences. Steve McDuffie's been very open about talking to the city and saying you don't need to send your kids to the Catholic schools to achieve this football success. There's other maybe social and educational components that are reasons why parents send their children to private schools. But if it's just an athletics decision, he's trying to say we can be just as good and maybe even better at Bennett High School than you can get at any of these private schools. And I don't think they're going to lose any of their current players to Canisius or St. Francis, but there's always going to be that, competition for the 8th graders coming up and, the younger players as to how you feed them into your program. There's also an interest, if you really break it down, with Canisius and the coaching changes they've had and whether they have the type of coaches at some of these schools to get city of Buffalo kids and attract them over. Sometimes you have to hire city of Buffalo people almost as recruiters to have on your staff. And I don't know if Canisius and St. Joe's and St. Francis have a lot of those or the right guys in those positions right now. So I think a lot of the city talent is going to stay at Bennett. They're going to want to stay at Bennett because of seeing the success and the media attention. This suspension thing or the forfeit thing hurt their record and seemed like it hurt the team. I think it helped them in a perception standpoint and gave this team a storyline and a rooting interest that now a lot of people in the city are behind it. and young 7th and 8th and 9th grade football players probably want to be part of the next great Bennett team. Or there's young kids that maybe will be playing for Bennett 10 years from now and think about, I watched those Bennett teams, or I watched that parade and it inspired me to want to do that later in my life. So I think you could be seeing the start of a dynasty here if the right people stay in the right positions and do the right things. And yesterday they were talking a lot about trying to get a new field house for the city of Buffalo, and that could be a game changer in that regard. So we'll see how it plays out. Every year could be a little bit different, but I don't see a lot of these city of Buffalo schools players being recruited to Catholic schools in the near future.
You mentioned 8th graders being recruited to the Catholic schools, and I know that happens, but when you say that,
it's a big part of the game. Every time
I know, but it reminds me too.
Coach at a young game, I ask him if he's recruiting, and then they don't say yes, but they don't say no.
But it also reminds me of what is at Graham Central Station, eye roll season. National Signing Day was just a couple of days ago, and I had to mute an awful lot of accounts that I normally follow because they were just tossing up these what look like little trading cards. Every school wants to put out their list. It's not just a list. You don't put out your recruiting lists. You put out every player is his own tweet. He gets a commitment page or whatever the F it is. And these kids don't even shave yet. And I get it. I watch college sports sometimes. I'm not into it as much as I am professional sports. I know that these 17-year-olds are going to turn into future NFL players and NBA players. But when it comes to National Signing Day, there's just something about it that just makes me think of all those people who fill the big stadiums. We're talking about the Big House, the Horseshoe, these 100,000 seat arenas, people who go nuts with their tailgating over, and their day is either ruined or made over children, borderline children. And I don't know, there's just something about it that when I really think hard about it, it just makes me shake my head of, and it's not the school's aspect of it, because they have to really pump the tires on every recruit that comes through their doors because every other school is going to do it. And if they're putting out mini trading cards or tweeting out these things, digital whatevers, NIL, this and that, at Alabama or even at Cincinnati or at Illinois, then you have to do it at your school too, or else they're going to say, hey, look at what they're getting. They're getting that cool thing, similar to, hey, check out this school. They wear 5 different helmets this year and 7 different uniform designs. How come we only have 2? There's all kinds of shit, and everything's being compared. But when you see that we've landed, I'm using a Boogie Nights name, just because I want to pick a fictional name, that we got Chest Rockwell from Chattanooga, and he's standing there and he's maybe even pointing at you with the football. He's pointing the football at you, and you can tell that this guy just got hair on his balls about a year and a half ago. And he
on his chest.
what, and it's like, what are we doing here? Like, with this, these are children. And we are just pinning the hopes of big state U and the success of my Saturday afternoon, if it's going to be made or broken by this kid who doesn't even have his driver's license yet.
Well, I wanted to give Matt an opportunity if he had a take, but let me just jump in real quick. That's very.
Yeah, how'd Missouri do with its children, children recruitment this year, Matt?
Well, let me just say that the graphics that you're railing against is very athlete driven. And that's what they want, and the schools.
Yeah, I know, I get that.
Culture. And I know at lower levels, like say junior college, they'll get a commitment, and the kid will kind of say, "Hey, you got a graphic for me?" Or if he doesn't, you wait to announce it before he can commission a local graphic artist to make him the graphic. Like, that's the thing. More than the scholarship and the education and the playing opportunity, or maybe equal to that, these athletes, and it goes for offers as well as commitments, they want that social media graphic that they can get shared around by their friends, and that kind of love and appreciation that comes from just that graphic.
Right. And before social media, it was media guides. It was media guides where these things were published, not for the media, but it was to hand out to recruits so they could see. And the thicker your media guide, the more obnoxious your media guide, then that was viewed as your badge of honor. Louisville basketball used to put out a hardcover media guide, and it was a book every year. And it was not for the media. it was in fact a hardback book is impractical for the media because we can't thumb through it quickly looking for information. The whole thing was anyways. But that's what it used to be before social media. And then it became, the next step was, we're going to give you your jersey and we're going to walk you out into the arena and the fight song is going to be playing and you get to see your name up on the Jumbotron. And now it's all the social media driven stuff. So this has been around in different forms, this wooing and this recruiting, but now this is very public and it's out there. And that's, I think, the part that that hits home with me is the fact that these schools are churning out these things. And I know they're athlete driven and you have to do it or else the kid is going to feel like he didn't get the full experience. But you're sending it out there to the public who looks and says, this is a child and he may not play for a couple of years. It's, you know what? And the NHL draft is not too far off from this, the whole concept of, look at this. And I know that they're trying to copy what the NFL does with its draft and the NBA, but the big show of, we're going to draft somebody. And with the exception of the first, maybe 2 or 3 picks, the team that drafts this guy, we're not going to see him for 4 years, or maybe he's coming from Russia, or maybe he's coming from a different country and he's going to go up through their development program. We'll see him eventually, maybe. But anyways, I get a kick out of it. That the hopes and dreams of billions of dollars of industry, the highest paid state workers in almost every state in the union is the football coach or the basketball coach. And all this money is just pinned on getting kids to go to your college and join your program.
You would think for these kids, it would be enough to get a nice tweet from Mike Rodak that says so-and-so has committed to the University of Alabama, according to a source. You'd think that would be enough for kids, but kids these days, you can't please them. But I at least like now that it feels like a little bit more of a level playing field where in some ways it's not totally level, but you get these, like Mizzou got Luther Burden the third, I think his name is, wide receiver recently. And he's a Missouri kid and got a bunch of NIL deals. Like there was a lot of incentive for him to stay at Missouri because, local endorsements and things like that. So that part's kind of fun, but it has gotten, I have been blissfully out of touch with college recruiting, probably almost since I left college at this point. I mean, since I had to cover it, which was an interesting thing to cover for a little while because it's like Tim mentioned, there's a lot of money getting thrown around. Now it's a little bit more out in the open, but it's certainly something I never experienced I was never recruited. So I don't know how these kids feel, but it is a weird position to be in. And the arms race for the gaudiest announcement and the please respect my decision. All that part sucks too, right? Like the amount of fans that come out,
and beat the hell out of them.
I'm jokingly saying, please respect
just
my
like,
decision.
F you suck. I hope you break your leg.
This person that they didn't know, or this kid that's committing when he's 16 or 17. And yeah, so that's my take. Please respect their decision and their infographics, whatever it is that they need to feel good, because that is a strange world.
Again, this is a how far it's come type moment. And I know that this is like old man stuff, but 25 years ago when I was covering UNLV, which is rather prominent program, especially in the 90s, they were maybe 4 or 5 years removed from winning a national title. They were
a vanguard of paying players too.
They were poor football program, but they were still in the WAC and then the Mountain West. I mean, it was still considered a recruiting hotbed getting kids out of Southern California and Texas and, Arizona, and you'd pull some pretty big recruits, JUCOs, and you would get at the Las Vegas Sun or the Las Vegas Review Journal or channels 3, 4, and 7, I think they were. You would get a press release and it just had the names on a list. And then that afternoon you would come down to a room at the stadium or in the athletic department, and they'd give you a little slideshow maybe, and give you some highlights, and you get to ask the coach what he thought of his recruiting class, and that'd be the extent of it. And that was, 25 years ago, I know that's a different era, but that's not that long ago.
It wasn't dramatically different when I was covering it. That would have been in 2013, 2014, 2013, like those years when I was doing it for Mizzou. Like I remember that exact thing, getting the list and going down and having the press conference, all the assistant coaches, whoever had recruited so-and-so player and could speak on their
Twitter is in full force in those years.
And of course
social media is a big thing.
You knew a lot of it ahead of time. And I think it does depend on your outlet and what your emphasis is, as a reporter and as an outlet, like how you make your, these rivals outlets and, I think they're still rivals 24/7. There's a few competitors, but that is their lifeblood. Like those crazy people we talk about that are not respecting these children's decisions are the ones that are paying money to be on these message boards and get the information ahead of time. But I remember, you knew some of the big names that were heading, and you probably knew a lot of the kids because somebody was paying attention to the kid with 600 Twitter followers tweeting out his announcement as if he were, the most important player in the world, that he had accepted his commitment to Missouri and all that. But really, when you got into the nuts and bolts of it, was that what you mentioned, you get called down and, you get to go through all the players, but it feels like it's sped up light years even since then. That's not even 10 years ago. And now it's
almost like it's trying to replicate pre-draft in the NFL. We're going to turn this into a cottage industry, which it has been. And it really has been. So in the 90s also, probably, I don't know, maybe even in the 80s, but I was first aware of it in the early 90s of, these recruiting tout sheets that you'd have for basketball players. Jonah, what are those guys? There were some big names.
Parade All-American or?
No, not just Parade, but they were coming out with they were these guys, they were considered like these gurus, and they'd go around all the
insiders. There
was a handful of them that you would go to. And they were making money off of a newsletter or putting out a list of the latest commitments and all these types of things. But it's now, kids who enter the NFL draft are being treated, or the kids who are possible NCAA Division I athletes are being treated like kids entering the NFL or entering the NBA. And we roll our eyes at that too. Some, like all the wasted breath that there is with mock drafts and trying to figure out which team has this need and do they see it the same way we see it, and are the Bills going to draft a running back with the first pick? And you can have, you can go on, you can have months worth of content on that alone. And now you see that's just now happening with kids that are now 16, 17, 18.
And in some ways it happens. You thought I was joking. Maybe this happens with 12 and 13-year-olds. There's combines for them and their high school programs, or in some states, there's major prep schools that are recruiting them. And in basketball, there's an AU element to that, where these players are prospects long before they ever get to college. And it's part of their development from a very young age, is not just your development as a player and your skills and your ability. It's also your marketability and getting coaches to pay attention to you and media to pay attention to you, and becoming a recruiting prospect as much as a actual player. And that's just part of the culture now.
Remember when we had Dwight Gooden on the show about a year and a half ago, and his son was a
5-star footballer.
He was turned into a 5-star recruit based on 2 games. He had flipped. He was a tight end, and they flipped him over to defensive end. And he was like the 3rd or 4th string tight end. And his dad finally talked him into, hey, give pass rushing a try. He played 2 games, got 4 sacks, and he became a 5-star recruit based on 2 games.
Listen, so that reminds me of something with Bennett. It's a story I'm writing about this weekend. Hopefully I can get it finished. But he was a player at Bennett who has been coaching the last couple of years. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because I want everybody to go to WIBB.com and read it when it's up. But there's reasons why he hasn't played.
I'm there every morning.
There's reasons why he hasn't played and he's been coaching. But he went to a Syracuse camp, and just the way he looked, running kids through drills. The Dino Babers, the coach, went up to Steve McDuffie and said, "Hey, who's that? I like your players, but who's that coach?" And then they got to talking and recognized that he could, still play, and he's going to get a walk-on opportunity now just because he looks like a dude on the sideline, and he is a good player. But these players get recruited out of camps as much by what they look like as opposed to what they actually produce on the field in the fall.
I will say, from a reporting standpoint, it becomes, when you're in the thick of it and the kids are actually, you're covering the actual recruiting itself in the moment, it feels a little weird. But after the fact, it is usually one of my favorite things to ask of a college coach of a now professional player is like, how'd you find this guy? Which sometimes it's obvious it's a 5-star play, like especially in football, it'd be like, how'd you find this guy? But I'm finding in hockey, it's really fun when it's like, so how'd you find this guy? And, hockey recruiting is for college teams or whatever it may be is still, it's not what football is, put it that way. I mean, it's a lot different. When I did a story on the Sabres Russian prospect, Steven Sardarian, the 3rd-round pick from 2021, it was the first time that UNH had successfully recruited a Russian player, or the first time this coach had, at least to his memory. And so you do get some fun anecdotes after the fact when you revisit these things, but covering it in the moment can be it'd be a good excuse to have our pal Mike Rodak join the conversation.
Recruiting is a much more feel-good, wholesome story when you write it from the player high school perspective, cover it that way than from the college perspective.
Yeah, from the college perspective, it feels like a big board and a mock draft, and you're determining, well, this recruiting class is a failure because, and that all these kids are sitting there like, well, the biggest triumph of my life is a big failure, right? According to, and that's where it becomes a little bit weird. And the drafts are similar, I would say. I think it's just sometimes helpful as a reporter to recognize where there's a lot of unknown, right? And I know it's easy to, or fun, or the thing to do to really, bang the table and have a strong take. But I just think sometimes, being like, well, we'll see, certainly the NHL draft taught me that this year. It's like, I'm just going to tell you who these guys are as I learn about them, who the Sabres think they are. And we'll revisit this down the road because frankly, this guy they picked in the 5th round, I'll see him at development camp, and then I'll see him in another year at development camp, and probably the year after that. And then we'll talk.
And he might never show up, or they miite trade his rights away before you ever see him.
Right. So it's different than football in that regard, where there is some instant judgment. But even then, I mean, look at Tage Thompson. People were ready to write him off entirely. He was a 1st-round pick, pretty lightly recruited, ends up being a 1st-round pick.
His projection got Jason Bottrell fired.
Right.
If anybody has any idea that Tage Thompson is going to become what Tage Thompson has become, Jason Bottrell's still the general manager of the Sabres.
Right. So, yeah. And if he had become it a year or two, a couple of years earlier, which is, if you look at all, a lot of statistical models that teams look at, they will say if he hasn't broken out by this point, you got to bump the ceiling down and bump the projection down. And Tage just screwed that up a little bit, and take that to the extreme with some of these 16, 17-year-old kids that people are making declarations about a class being a failure. I mean, especially in college, you see in college all the time, you see NFL draft weekend, so many 3 stars, 2 stars. How many stars did Josh Allen have? And it's like, if the guy ends up in the right program, if a guy, is developed by the right people, certain schools know what they're doing in that regard. But still, for some people, that's good fun. So.
All right. So get this. This is, I guess, anecdotal, but plays into exactly what you're talking about, Matthew. So I'm doing some Christmas shopping at Eastern Hills Mall, which has a lot of like memorabilia type stores that are just kind of turned into pop-ups because these malls have a lot of empty storefronts. And I think, people just like pay some rent for a few months and sell some cards and whatnot. And I got into a discussion with the guy who owns this particular one. And while we're talking, I'm looking in the showcase and there's a box of cards. And I wish I remembered what it was, but you got 6 cards in the entire box. Price tag on the box, $725. And I said, all right, look, I kind of get memorabilia. I understand how cards work, but you're going to have to explain this to me. I like to think that I have a pretty, at least loose knowledge, and I'm not surprised by much in the memorabilia industry because I understand supply and demand and rarity and signatures and all kinds of stuff. But I'm like, how is this possible? Trevor Lawrence is on the box. It's a box of 2021 something or other. 6 cards for $725. And he says to me, he's like, what happened was the 2020 draft class was so loaded with superstar quarterbacks. And we're talking about COVID, and we've talked about it, Matthew, how everybody was predicting, and the predictions came true, that sports cards were going to become mammoth business. And then COVID came along and expedited that. Even like cards were not worth as much as there was an investor in particular that you follow. He was saying it.
Yeah, Gary V was all over that.
Right,
Gary,
that's right.
He's a sports agent. He owns an agency, an NFL,
right.
Mostly NFL agent.
So the COVID comes along, and the 2020 draft class includes a ton of stars at the quarterback position. And so then, so people are investing in cards left and right. And so then here comes the 2021 draft class, and 3 quarterbacks are off the board with the first 3 picks. 5 quarterbacks within the first 15 picks, and memorabilia people love to invest in quarterbacks. Well, so it drove up the price before anybody saw any of these guys play. Now, Trevor Lawrence is showing some signs of life here in the past couple of weeks, but number 2 overall was Zach Wilson. Number 3 overall was Trey Lance, who could be great, but the injury aspect of it. Justin Fields, yes. Mac Jones, who knows? But you have so many rookie expectations that are put on the memorabilia that it drove up the price to where it just becomes unreasonable, and people are buying these cards at this price. So now you can't really unload them. They have to stay at this price, even though it's not commensurate with what happened in 2020 with Joe Burrow and that whole crew of quarterbacks. Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert, and you just have these, MVP candidate type names that are being thrown around. Well, the next class doesn't have it. I do want to put a bow on things regarding Dwight Gooden, who is he's a friend of the show. He came on the show. He talked about his son, Dylan Gooden, because that weird thing happened where he switched. It was from wide receiver to defensive end, not tight end. But he was deep backup, couldn't get on the field. He did, and my memory served correct, he played defensive end for 2 games, got 4 sacks, obviously very nice, in Maryland, and he became a 5-star recruit immediately. 2 days ago, he signed with Maryland. He received 20 Division I scholarship offers, and usually when you're of that caliber, you probably could have gotten 100 scholarship offers, but 80 or 50 schools know they don't have a shot. So his 20 schools included Tennessee and Penn State. He picks Maryland, which is his home state, which is off of 2 games as a sophomore. Now, he went on and played very well this past year as a junior, so it's not like it's a total wash, but the 5-star label came after 2 games as a sophomore at a position he'd never played. That's amazing to me.
Well, can I just wrap it up with one last recruiting grievance, being that it's Festivus and all? Because UB, they signed 20 players this week. Last year they had the number 1 rated recruiting class in the MAC. It's a little early to figure out where that slides in because it's just the early signing period. But anyways, 20 players, a good number of them. I think 8 or 9 are 3-star players. One of them's the Mr. Ohio running back, which seems like a good get. But so a lot of recruiting coverage from media, but also, that fan media gray area type analysis. Everybody's a good get, and everything was a great job by this coach getting this player. And this is a great class, and it's going to change the future. But if you really get into talking to coaches and high school coaches and in the recruiting business, not everybody's a great get. Sometimes coaches have to be talked into taking a chance on these players. How many times, Matt, have you written about somebody who was under recruited and he turned out to be a good player, but all the college coaches didn't think he was a good player?
Josh Allen.
Right. So there's just so much hot air in recruiting coverage, and there's 140 colleges, and about 139 of them had like the best class they've ever signed that they're really excited about, and everybody's a good get. But then when they get on the field, they're not all that so great of a gets, and a lot of them end up back in the transfer portal and being re-recruited later on. And recruiting has become about 50% recruiting transfers and re-recruiting your own roster. And as you said earlier, I do long for the days sort of when you got the recruiting list and you analyzed it a little bit, and then you really didn't judge these players until they actually got on the field. Now, every offer, every commitment, every day in the journey of football and basketball recruiting is an analysis, and fans have their own opinions on who should be recruiting, who's going to be a star. When they're not a star, they blame the coaches for not developing that player properly. And it's just way too much hot air about recruiting these, as you mentioned, children that we don't quite know what they're going to be as adults.
It's even more hot air than NFL draft coverage, where couldn't believe this guy was available in the fifth round. Unbelievable. Couldn't believe it. He should have been had a third round grade on him, and you got no way to verify that or even know what that means, or and even you ask point blank some people, like, what does a 4-star mean? Like, how do you know what a 4-star is versus a 5-star? How do you know what a second round grade is versus a first round grade?
Hey, these guys don't know the difference between a 4-head and a 4-skin, huh?
It's like,
let alone a 4-star, huh?
And
let's be careful with the 4 slander here.
It's like people are like, they don't really, even the people that are doing it, I feel like mostly will just say, well, I know it when I see it, or I have a catalog of what a 4-star looks like, so this guy is a 4-star. And to Jonah's point, where the instant rush to judgment, it's something I've thought a lot about. Like, we were talking about UPL, and a couple of years ago, UPL was the guy. Because in hockey, I think people get excited about the prospects, because like recruiting, you land these guys, but unlike that, they sometimes go away for a little while, right? But, for a couple of years, maybe they're overseas, maybe they're still in juniors, whatever it may be. And you sit there and they're sort of out of sight, out of mind, right? Even if you're following UPL's exploits with the Sudbury Wolves religiously, you can't have enough emotional energy to be pissed off when he lets in 5 goals in a junior game. Or to even know what that means on a given night. But he gets to the NHL with 9 games of NHL experience under his belt. And, those first 5 or so games don't go well. And it's like, well, this guy's not an NHL goalie. It's like 2 or 3 years ago, you would have told me that this was the guy that they should play in the future around. And now it's 15 games into his NHL career, and just forget about him. He's 23. He's played 15 NHL games, 9 of which were fantastic last year, in terms of his overall sample size. So it is interesting how psychologically the next big thing goes to afterthought pretty quickly. And it actually is, Devin Levi is the next hot thing right now in goal, right? He's going to save the Sabres, and he's going to fix all their goalie problems for the next 15 years, is the general, optimistic line of thinking from people who are a big fan of this kid. And he's great. He's a fantastic goalie. He's an awesome human being. He's a joy to talk to. He's got a great head on his shoulders. Looks like he will find himself a nice NHL career. But when I was talking to his college goalie coach over the summer, he made that point about UPL in terms of why Devin Levi went back to school, because people were surprised. Why would this guy go back to school? He throw him right in the Sabres net, after the way he played last year. Forget this, throw him right in the net. And his point was, this guy gets to come back to school. There'll be pressure. He's playing in the Hockey East. It's not like he's playing in obscurity, but he's not going to be judged on every little thing. Like, the second you go pro, the second you step on a college campus, in the recruit's case, you're judged on everything. I mean, you're judged before that, really, but the second it starts to count for the fans, you're not a prospect anymore. UPL is not a prospect. He's just a guy that's not stopping the puck enough, and that's where the rush to judgment is. It's got to be tough on these guys, and especially more so in the age of social media and everything else, where they can see a lot of that feedback in real time if they want to search it out. Not the healthiest way to develop your psyche as a professional athlete.
Boys, have a great and safe holiday weekend. Hopefully you don't have to go anywhere. I am snowed in and happy with that.
Is it going to be Victory Sunday, or is that observed on Monday because of the holiday?
I think everything's pushed back. It's like your garbage collection. Everything's pushed back.
We had some people put their garbage out in the neighborhood today. It's like 50-50. Like some people have Friday and we have Monday, but even if, it depends which company you use. And some people put their garbage out this morning, and I was just like, look, I do some silly things.
That could be wishful thinking, because it's not going to get picked up if not today, because of this. There's going to be a snowbank. So
of course,
roll the dice and hope.
Hoping that they got there early.
Yeah, but some of that garbage is in another neighborhood by now.
Well, yeah, that's how I found out. I looked out the window and there was, these garbage cans flying down the street, garbage flying all over the place. And I'm just thinking, I looked down the street. I'm like, who did this? Who thought this was a good idea?
It's like the old movie theaters when the candy and the popcorn would be flying at you.
Yeah, I was like, what is, and that was pretty early. It got pretty nasty pretty early in the morning here in here down by the lake in the South Town. So it was I got a kick out of that though. I was, like you said, they were probably just really, really wishful thinking that if not now, never, because it's not till next Friday, and next Friday, I don't know, maybe the holidays observed. So that was a tough one. They had to chase that down as the flash freeze was happening.
Well, thank you guys for breaking away from your Yule log to join me here for a little while and talk some sports. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. We will do this again before the new year, so I won't say that one. We'll save that one for next week. And everybody out there listening, stay safe, stay warm. Hopefully you are not working off battery power right now, but if you are, thank you for wasting the last of it by listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.